Welcome everybody to this investor update. My name is Helena Nordman and I will be here to support you through the day. So if you have any questions relating to the presentations or anything in terms of practicalities, please do come forward and ask me. Before we start, we just want to go through the practicalities also, like the secure doors where you can exit if something happens, and they're just around the corner and here. And then of course we have the formalities as well. We have the disclaimer here. This presentation may contain forward-looking statements, and then we have that in order. And then I want to talk a little bit about what we are going to talk about today. We have 4 excellent speakers with us today. We have Jörgen Lantto, the CEO of Fingerprint. Hello. Here. And he will talk about market position and also about company outlook. And then we have Thomas Rex here, EVP Sales and Marketing, who will talk about market position and also about customers and sales. And Pontus, Jägemalm, who will give an introduction into technology. And that's very, very interesting in my meaning. And then we will have the first part of question and answers. And that will be about 10 minutes long. So don't get angry or upset if you haven't had your question asked yet. We will have a second question and answer session after we've gone through the financials. And as you know, we had a small mishap this morning. The press release was distributed, I must say, in the wrong time zone at the wrong time. And these things happen with service providers now and then. But now we are here, and let us focus on this event now and on these presentations here. And I think it will be an excellent afternoon. So go ahead, Jörgen. Come up and talk to us.
Thank you, Helena.
Sorry.
So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for coming and attending this investor update. I will start by talking a bit about FPC, just to set the scene. So according to a recent analysis published by Cohen a few weeks ago, we are now the world's largest fingerprint sensor supplier. And that is a result of 18 years of development of our fingerprint sensor technology, combined with the recent year of relative explosion in the market when it comes to penetration of fingerprint sensors into smartphones. So as you will hear today, we are operating with a highly scalable business model, being a fabless semiconductor vendor providing fingerprint sensors to the smartphone OEMs. And we are highly exposed to the growing penetration of fingerprint sensors in the smartphone business. And smartphones carry significant volumes. The global smartphone market per year is typically about 1.5 billion units. So when you take a strong position in such a market, then there is room for lots of volumes and lots of growth. So before I talk about 2016, let me recap a bit on what happened during 2015. So 2015 was clearly a fantastic year for us, with the growth in revenues estimated to be more than 1,000%. We haven't closed the year yet. And it was clear for us already a year ago when we met customers in the early part of 2015 that the OEMs had decided to embrace this technology and embed fingerprint sensors in smartphones. And we had lots of discussions with the customers at that time. 1 year ago, we had a technology that had been proven because it had been launched in some phones, and we had a product portfolio covering the different ways of integrating fingerprint sensors in smartphones for backside placements, for putting the sensor as a home button in the front of the phone, or putting the fingerprint sensor on the side of the phone. So we had the product portfolio to meet the customers' demands. And then our sales organization, led by Thomas Rex, who will talk more after me, they set course in talking to all the different OEMs and show them our products. Well, we managed to win a lot of business because of our products that were ready and because of great efforts from our sales organization. So in comparison, 1 year ago, 2 phones had been launched in the market with our touch fingerprint sensors. One phone launched so 1 phone each from 2 OEMs. Today, I'm very proud to note that 24 OEMs have launched 53 smartphones or tablets using our touch fingerprint sensor technology. Quite a massive growth, really. Thomas will talk more about this. So then, having talked about what has been done in the year, we haven't closed the year yet, but the year until now, I will talk more about how we see the market developing going forward. And this chart contains a lot of new information, so I will cover this in some detail. So starting with the smartphone market, this is where we have the dominant share of our revenues. This is where we have seen the biggest growth in the market so far, especially in 2015. And just to recap, what we have talked previously about when it comes to penetration is we estimate 30% penetration of fingerprint sensors in smartphones in 2015 and 50% penetration in 2016. Now these penetration rates, 30 and 50% respectively, they refer to the market including Apple, so the entire smartphone market. Now, looking at these figures, we have revised them slightly, so now we estimate that the penetration in the market is somewhat more than 30% in 2015, and we estimate it to grow to somewhat more than 50% in 2016. So a small adjustment there and major growth in the market. This slide, however, does not show the Apple volume. It shows the addressable market for our offering, and that does not include Apple. We don't consider Apple an addressable customer in the smartphone market. And so it shows what we think is the addressable market for us and our competitors. And you see in 2016, for instance, our addressable market in volume is estimated to be more than 500 million units. When we go to 2017, the market is estimated to grow to almost 1 billion units, again excluding Apple this time. So major growth in the smartphone market in the years to come. However, what you see in these slides is now also showing how we see the other segments start to contribute. Those are the white bars on top of the red bars that show the smartphone volumes. So as you can see here, we estimate some initial volumes in 2016, but in 2017 and 18 we estimate quite substantial volumes in the other segments that come on top of the smartphone opportunity. So other segments includes PCs, tablets, the bank sector, smart cards that we will talk a lot about today, industrial applications, other verticals like automotive, Internet of Things, etc. So other devices than the smartphones. And as you can see, in 2018, we estimate that market alone to be almost the same size as the smartphone market for us in 2016. So 2 years later, we estimate to see as big opportunity in the new segments as we have for the smartphone market now, basically. So quite some interesting growth there. Then I would like to talk about the value and our position in the market. So here the addressable market again is what we and our competitors address excluding Apple. Today's segments focused on the smartphones and then the contributing segments as well. And in 2015 we estimate our share of the value coming from the fingerprint sensor market to be approximately 45%. In 2016 we estimate that the value of the total market will double in size, actually increase by a bit more than 100%, 105%. So the size of the market next year is twice as big as this year. On top of that, we also estimate that we will grow our share of the value of this market. In 2015 again, we estimate it to be 45%. In 2016, we estimate our share of the value to be between 50 to 70%. And those of you who have read our press release, you recognize that there is a range in our share of the value and also in the revenue guidance that we have given for 2016. So that takes me to the guidance for our revenues and other data for 2016. So as communicated, well, a bit earlier today than planned, the revenues for 2016 is estimated to be between 6.5 and 8.5 billion SEK. Further, we also estimate that our operating margin in 2016 will exceed our operating margin for the second half 2015. And again, we estimate that the market will grow in value with 105%, and we are going to increase our market share. The 6.5 to 8.5 billion SEK in revenues, that corresponds to 130 to 200% growth in revenues for us compared to market growth of 105%. So we plan to grow faster than the market. And we believe that the major growth in the market will come from the increase in fingerprint sensor penetration in the smartphones. Again, referring to the entire market, including Apple now, up to 50% or more penetration of fingerprint sensors in smartphones in 2016. And we talk about the smartphone market a lot here, but the reason why the penetration increases in the smartphones is because of consumer demand. Consumers want to use the fingerprint sensors. They use it for unlocking the phones. I have mentioned many times, consumers use our products several billions of times every day, which are quite staggering figures. So there is a very strong consumer demand for getting relieved from using PIN codes and passwords. Secure mobile payment is another major driver. We will talk more about it during the day. But people want to use their phone for making payments. People want to leave the home without the wallet and use the phone for payments instead. So that is one particular driver, and the fingerprint sensor is an essential piece of the secure mobile payment. And most importantly, our customers are there to launch phones increasingly with our sensors. So with that introduction, I would like to hand over to Thomas Rex, Head of Sales. Thomas will talk about how we work with the customers, our visibility of the outlook in 2016, and how we see the market development overall.
Okay, thank you, Jörgen. In this month, in December, we are shipping 1 million units on an average working day, 1 million units. And this is much more than we have ever done in the past, and it's also much more than any of our competitors are doing. And that's why we are the market leader in fingerprint sensors. That if you reflect back 1 year, in 4 days in December, 4 average days is the same volume as we shipped for the whole year last year. So it's a dramatic growth actually. Last week I was in China and I met many of our key customers, and when traveling around in China it was a real joy to see our phones, or I say our phones, but our fingerprint sensor in phones everywhere. Of course in phone shops, that's natural. Everywhere you can see our phones. But in addition to that, airports, billboards, airplane magazines, I only saw phones with fingerprint sensors actually being advertised. And I only saw FPC-based phones. Maybe I have some kind of special vision, but anyway, that's the situation. So this is visible evidence of our success in 2015. So what about 2016? Well, when talking to the customers, it's very encouraging to hear that many of them, they tell me that next year when we launch phones, a majority of them will have fingerprint sensors. So of course some are already doing a lot of phones with fingerprint sensors like Huawei, but some just started. Xiaomi launched one phone, for instance, and Gionee and so on launched one phone. So when you talk to some of these players, I'm not saying it's them, but they tell me next year we will ship a lot of phones with fingerprint sensors. Also, you can see that they are putting touch fingerprint sensors in lower and lower segments. So last year there was some kind of record for us when ZTE launched the Blade A1, 599 RMB. That's less than $95 US, a little bit more than 800 Swedish kronor. You can just imagine putting our high-end fingerprint sensor in such a low-end phone. That is really good, and we see this trend going forward. So looking then at China, FPC took an early lead in China when we launched the Mate 7 together with Huawei. That was in September 2014. Then after that, in total, we have launched 42 phones with the Chinese customers. So not so strange that I saw all of these phones maybe when I travel around in China. We decided early to focus on the top 10 players. They give the volume, they are more mature. So we focused a lot on the top 10 players and also some other exciting brands that we felt were upcoming. And that has really paid off because we have launched with 9 out of the 10 top players in China, and also with some of those exciting brands that I mentioned. And out of these 9 top 10 players, a majority of them only launched with FPC. They never launched with anybody else. Take Huawei, for instance. That is the best example. They have launched 10 phones. They were happy with the Mate 7. They launched with us again and again and again and again. And hopefully they see no reason to change to somebody else. Since we have the best performance, we give them the best support, etc. And Xiaomi is another one of the giants, Lenovo and so on. They're all launching with the FPC sensor. So why do we have this mass growth in China of mobile phones with fingerprint sensors? Well, one reason is that Chinese are faster. I mean, they have a shorter product development time, so they can bring out new products quicker than other markets. Another reason is, Jörgen touched upon this, but the Chinese consumers, they like to make payment, for instance, with a device they trust, their own mobile phone. Maybe they are nervous about getting skimmed, or there could be high fees when paying with other means in China. So that's another reason. And the third reason is Huawei. They saw they could make a strategic bet on fingerprint sensors, outcompeting some others having swipe sensors, being first, having many phones with it, developing interesting applications around it, like the navigation and taking pictures and browsing through your pictures and so on. So when they did this, they are the leader in China. The others kind of followed suit. Being number one in China is not a bad thing for us. Probably some of these names, maybe you never heard of them. But actually, out of the top 10 players in China, 6 of them are also global top 10 players. So we shouldn't forget that. And out of the 8 biggest players in China are the top 12, in the top 12 list in the world. So even if you never heard of the names, and I see in the press that people cannot pronounce the names even, they are actually big players. Okay, so that was China. How about the rest of the world? Well, it's a well-known fact that Samsung selected a competitor of ours, and also that Apple use in-house solution. And TCL recently launched with a competitor as well. Some are still to launch smartphones like Microsoft, but apart from those, everybody or a lot of them are selecting FPC. So we have a really wide customer base. For instance, if you look at Korea, LG launched with FPC. In Japan, and globally of course, Sony launched the Xperia Z5, etc. And HTC, every touch fingerprint sensor phone they have launched is with FPC. So even if we are big in China, our market share outside China, if you disregard Samsung and Apple, is actually bigger than in China in percentage. So what about North America or the US? Well, when Google decided to introduce in Android M support for fingerprint sensors, they turned to FPC. We cooperated on making that work in Android M, and as a result, the 2 phones they launched, the Nexus 5X developed by LG and the Nexus 6P developed by Huawei, both use the FPC fingerprint sensor. And I mean, we don't know, of course, how big impact has this had that Google adopted fingerprint support in Android. But there are some evidence, like Xiaomi, they publicly stated, before Google adds it, we will not launch any phone with fingerprint sensor. And just after the Android M was released with this support, a few months later, they launched their first phone with our sensor. So we believe it has impact. It shows credibility to this technology. Also Microsoft, when they wanted to develop fingerprint support in Windows, they turned to FPC. We collaborated, and as a result, when they launched their first product recently with a touch fingerprint sensor, it has our sensor in it. It's a tablet actually. That's why you didn't see them on the previous page, but it's a tablet called Surface Pro 4. I want to talk a little bit about our value chain. So we have FPC on the left here, and on the far right you have the OEMs. And it is the OEMs who decide what fingerprint sensor to select. It's those you have to convince, please use FPC. So that is where we turn our sales force. That is where we promote, our engineers promote the technology. That's where we get the design win. And that is where we then work together with them. We have FAEs, field application engineers on site, helping them to launch the phone throughout the project. And this is what creates the stickiness. I mean, we are in their environment with our engineers, use our software, tie it together with their software, make it work, have a successful launch. Why move to somebody else after that? So this is really, really important for us, the cooperation with the OEMs. In the middle here, you see the module houses. We actually work with almost 10 module houses, and the reason for that is that every OEM have their favorite module house. They used to buy camera modules from them, so now they want to buy fingerprint sensor from the same companies. They have a relationship, so they become our virtual sales force, you can say. They want to sell their modules, and at the same time they are selling our fingerprint sensor. So we collaborate with the module houses a lot when we get the design wins. And so our business model is very scalable. What we normally ship is this, the wafer. So the software goes straight to the OEM, but the wafer we ship often through a distributor. They handle a warehouse, they handle some financial risks, and then they provide that to the module houses. So then the module house, and maybe I'm a bit nasty here now, but they kind of put the wrapping around the candy. So the right color, the right look and feel, the right size, etc., etc. They put a bezel sometimes on it, and they connect it to the rest of the phone via a cable. This makes our business model extremely scalable, and that's positive. Then looking at a phone ramping, so how does that look? Well, let's say for a phone launching in Q4 this year, we probably have some promotion discussion with the OEM. We get the design win maybe end of Q2 or early Q3. The project starts. We provide some samples, maybe hundreds. Later on, they have some pre-production, and then we ship in the thousands. Then we have the ramp, where we, depending on how big this phone is, could be millions, could be hundreds of thousands of units. But the point here is that take a flagship phone like Mate 8, Huawei Mate 8. The vast majority of the volume comes after, in this case in next year. So actually those phones launching now, like the Xiaomi Redmi Note 3 or the Mate 8 and those phones, they generate most of the volumes next year. Here, the previous slide showed one phone. Here you see all the phones. So the white ones are the ones that were launched in this year. They continue to generate volume into next year. Of course, we have some design wins here, Q3, Q4, that are not yet launched. Some of them launch in first half next year, some even into second half next year. They will also generate volume into next year. On top of that, thanks to our dialogue with the customers, we know what we can expect in terms of new projects next year, especially in the first half. Of course, it gets the further out, the more blurry it gets, but we still have a pretty good picture what we can expect for next year. So when you put all this together, we get a fairly good view of our volume shipment next year and our revenue next year. And actually the OEMs, they really want to talk to us. They want to tell us what they are going to ship. And why is that? Yes, because they want us to secure volume for them. Maybe they even want us to in some commercial agreement, secure volumes to them. So that really gives us good visibility. Of course, we are not 100% sure exactly this or that. That's why we are guiding with a range. But we know fairly well what we can expect. Okay, so my final slide then, summary. So we have become the clear market leader for fingerprint sensors. Again, in December, on an average working day, only working days, we ship around 1 million units, and that makes us the clear leader. 53 phones launched this year compared to 2 last year. We have a very strong market position in China, and again, being big in China is a good thing because those are the top players. Those are the ones that are growing, generally speaking, more than the other players in the world. So being big there is good. At the same time, we are also getting the market share outside Apple and Samsung. We are winning a lot of other customers in Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and US, and so on. And we have a highly scalable model that is one big reason for the good profitability we can see. And also, we have good visibility into 2016 because we talk to the customers. We work with every customer more or less, so we know what we can expect for next year. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Thomas. I will give an introduction to our technology and talk about why our sensors perform so well. One of the reasons behind our technology leadership is the full system capability. This means that we have a broad know-how across the whole sensor system. And to illustrate this, let's take a look at the 4 teams within R&D. Down at the bottom left, you have the ASIC team. That team is responsible for creating the silicon sensors. It's an CMOS technology, which is the core of the sensor. Then we have the packaging team. They are responsible for taking the chip and transferring it into a complete product. And it needs to look good and it needs to work well. Then we have the algorithm team. They're responsible for the image processing and applying the algorithm to find the interesting points in your fingerprint pattern. Finally, we have the system and software team, where the software, they're responsible for the driver. They're responsible for secure implementations into the phone's processor, and also demo applications. Then we have the system portion, and they ensure that this works well as a complete system. All the disciplines here, and that we build well-working units. They also characterize the units and test them before we launch a new product. And having the complete infrastructure and the knowledge across the teams is really important for bringing a competitive offer to the market. So we have a unique and extensive experience in fingerprint touch systems, and in fact we have been doing this since 1998. Already in 1999 we had a demo of a plug-in to an Ericsson phone, but that was probably too early for the market. We have a broad IP portfolio with more than 100 patents, and we're confident about having a good IP position. And our team is very competent and well educated. We have approximately 30% PhDs in R&D. So it's a really good team to work with. The fact that we have very well performing sensors and high image quality goes back to the 18 years of experience. We have been using these 18 years to obtain a really good image quality, as you can see an example of here. The sensor produces detailed images with very good accuracy. So this is not just a two-dimensional image of your fingerprint, it's actually a three-dimensional replica of your finger. Here you can see a zoomed-in picture from the big one, and the black dots that you can see here are actually sweat pores on your fingerprint ridges. So it illustrates the accuracy of the sensor. Now the image quality in itself is interesting, but it's when you combine it with a world-class algorithm system that you get a good synergy and a really well-performing system. And this enables us to work with small sensors, because then you get a smaller portion of the fingerprint. But because of the high image quality, you get a lot of features in that small image. And also the algorithm is able to pick out the interesting points in that data. So how is the biometric performance characterized? Well, typically there are two measures that are used. It's the false acceptance rate and the false rejection rate. The false acceptance rate corresponds to the security level in the system, and that's the likelihood that an unauthorized user would be able to enter the system. So for example, that I would be able to enter your phone. Then we have the false rejection rate, and that corresponds to the convenience level. It's a likelihood that an authorized user would not be able to enter the system. So for example, that you would not be able to enter your own phone. And of course you want both of these to be low. You want a false acceptance rate that is low, and you want a low false rejection rate. but traditionally these are somewhat opposed. So that if you have a high security, which is a low false acceptance rate, you would get a high false reject rate, and the opposite. And this is where the algorithm system is so important. And here it's illustrated with an algorithm B and an algorithm A. And obviously A is much better because for a given security value, such as 1 over 50,000, you get a much lower false rejection rate. We have been able to optimize our systems so that we get behavior like this algorithm A here. And of course that's really good for the performance. And this is also true for small sensors. So we're able to obtain a good security and a good convenience on these smaller sensors. So it's an important conclusion here. You do not need large sensors to get the security. Then if we look at our state-of-the-art typical values here, we typically work at a security point of 1 over 50,000, and we get a false reject rate that is much lower than 2% often. 1 over 50,000 we can compare to a PIN code. As you know, a 4-digit PIN code is 1 over 10,000 in security. So what does this mean with 1 over 50,000? Well, if we were able to get 50,000 people in this room, statistically, one of them would be able to unlock my phone. Right? It's really good here. We're able to obtain a high security, and because of the behavior on this curve, you can see that it's relatively flat. So we could go to even higher securities without getting a big penalty on the convenience level. Now let's go back to the good image quality and how our sensors work. This is a cross-section of one of our sensors. The pixels are normally arranged in an array, so much like a display, but in this case you're reading in a signal instead of displaying a signal. Pixel size is about 50 microns, and the dimension of a typical sensor is 5 to 10 millimeters across. The wavy black line that you see here corresponds to the finger pattern. So this would be a ridge, and this would be a valley. Then you have the light blue area in between, and that's a protective coating that protects the silicon. And it can also include cosmetic properties like color. Then when you measure the capacitance, you measure between every point on the finger and each pixel. And now capacitance depends on the distance between the objects. So then you get a 3-dimensional image of your finger. We use an active method, and we believe that provides the best signal to the system. It's illustrated here with a signal going between the finger and the pixel. And if we compare to competition, we have Aegis-Tech, for example. They use a passive method, so non-active, without such a signal. Then also our measurement is direct. So we measure the capacitance directly between the finger and the pixel. And again, if we compare to competition, we have Synaptics. They measure between a pair of crossing lines. They measure the impedance between those two lines, and depending if you have a ridge or a valley on that point, you get a perturbation on the signal. So that's more of a second-order effect, whereas we measure the signal directly, and that gives a superior signal. An important part here is the pixel design, and it's something that we have been working on for a long time, and we have good expertise, and we have patents. And if you combine this good pixel design with the direct measurement method and the active method, you get a really good image quality. Also, in the pixel design, we have focused on getting low power, which is really important for many of these applications. So then, let's have a different look at the sensor, a different way to represent it. Here again, you see the two-dimensional array of pixels. You see the finger on top, and you see these charge detectors that are associated with each pixel. Charge is basically the same as capacitance here. We use CMOS technology in our sensors. And for those of you that are not too familiar with that, that's the same technology that is used in many processor in computers or in image sensors in cameras. And as a side note, that's a big advantage for us because there's a lot of fabs that can produce the CMOS sensors. And when we have been ramping up quickly over the last year, it's been a big advantage for us that this is an established production possibility. Well, returning to the sensor, the pixel measurement, the capacitance measurement, is analog. That means that the pixel array is designed in analog CMOS technology. There is also a smaller portion of the sensor represented out here, which is a digital control logic. But since we have received some questions on this in the past, I think it's important to conclude that clearly the biggest part by percentage in the sensor is an analog CMOS technology. Another area that is really important for performance is how you package the sensor. And normally for semiconductors, you find them as a little black component inside an electronic device. For us, it's really different. Here the sensor sits on the outside of a device where industrial design is really important, and it needs to be robust. So if we start with the industrial design side, you need to be able to adopt the shape, the size, and the thickness of the sensor, typically for every phone project that we're involved in. You need to be able to match color, and in the example on the left you see a goldish looking phone, and then you want the sensor to also be goldish looking typically. There's also interest for having different types of material on top of the sensor. For example, glass. As you know, there's glass on the front side of the phone, and in some cases also on the back side. And now there's interest from some mobile phone makers that they want to put our sensor beneath the glass. And that has been an active development area for us. And as we have communicated before, we're about to release products with this functionality. And then finally, there's sometimes a requirement for a metallic bezel around the sensor as a frame, shown here. Then we get to the product integration. First, there is the maybe obvious requirement that the packaging should enable the sensor functionality. But it's not really as trivial as it sounds. Because any material you put on top of the pixels will sit between the pixels and your finger, so it affects the measurement chain. And then also, depending on how you mount the sensor, if it, for example, sits underneath the phone casing, it will affect what part of the skin you can measure. So it's really important how that works, and of course we're heavily involved there with the OEMs in this design. Then we have the electrical interface, which is how you connect the sensor electrically to the phone. You have a mechanical interface for defining how it's mounted to the device. And then we have sometimes a requirement for having a waterproof sensor, which we can support without issues. Then if we go to the right in the image here, we have component reliability. And we're able to meet the most commonly used standards in mobile phones for reliability. Some examples here of things that are of interest is the ESD requirement, electrostatic discharge. You can see an example here where we apply 30,000 volts to the sensor and make sure that it survives. We have mechanical robustness that can involve things like dropping a heavy steel ball onto the sensor and making sure that it can survive. We have thermal resistance, which may include things like temperature cycling, low and high temperature storage, and so on. And then we have chemical protection in case you happen to pour coffee on the sensor or put acetone on the sensor. We make sure that it can withstand. So it's a really robust system, and this has been a big advantage for us, because even though we deliver this in many volumes, in many millions, as I said before here, we hardly have received any returns from the field. So last but not least, we have the integration of the sensor into the mobile phone platform. So here the algorithm is put into the software and then delivered to the customer. And the algorithm and the software runs in the application processor of the phone. Here security is of high interest. Jörgen talked about the mobile phone payments as a driver. So you want to make sure that you get a secure implementation, and that is done through what is called a trusted execution environment, or a TEE. And that is used to safeguard your private information. The TEE works in a way that a part of the phone's processor is run in a safe mode. So other applications running in the phone, they cannot get at this secure implementation. So in that way, it works both to keep the authentication process secure, but it also protects your private information. We support all the major platforms that mobile phone makers use. So a platform in this case can mean delivered from a company like Qualcomm, MediaTek, or HiSilicon, and several others. And then there are a number of different trusted execution environments that can be used on those platforms. So that means that there's a lot of combinations also. So this has been a pretty big task for especially for our software team, to support those different combinations, also for all our different sensors. But now when that work is done, I think we're in a really good position. We're benefiting now from having repeat projects where we don't have to redo all the work. So to conclude, we have a unique and extensive experience since 1998 on touch sensors. We have a very strong team, and we have capability across the whole system. We have been able to develop a really good image quality, and when we combine that with the world-class algorithm system, we get really good performance. And of course, now I talked mostly about what we have been doing, but of course we have a lot of interesting projects in the pipe now, so it will be interesting to see what we can do in 2016 and forward. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Pontus. So let's start with the first Q&A session, and maybe Jörgen and Thomas want to join us now.
Hi, Paul Jensen from Carnegie. Could you walk us through the assumptions you've made for the guidance? You stated in the press release, first of all, that you aim to take 50 to 70% of the total value of the market. So obviously you have some penetration, you have some ASPs on top of that. Perhaps you can give some more color on that.
Yes, so basically, as Thomas mentioned, we base our guidance on extensive dialogue with the customers. Thomas' team meets with the smartphone vendors every day, and they tell us the volumes they would like to ship in a long future, now ranging into most of 2016. So we have, of course, as Thomas mentioned, that's why we put these slides forward here. We have phones that have been launched in the market already, and especially those that have been launched in the latter part of 2015. They will generate substantial revenues in 2016 as well, as shown in one of the pictures that Thomas showed. On top of that, we have all the phones being developed now that are yet to be launched. We also have good visibility with some of the OEMs. Thomas mentioned this. They have 3 to 6 months lead time, so we have visibility of phones to be launched within that time frame. Some of the OEMs, they work with longer lead times, taking up to maybe 9 months in some cases. So we have those type of lead times as well. And then for many customers, we have far-reaching discussions on what type of volumes they expect to ship during the full year. And they tell us because they want to make sure that we reserve sufficient capacity for them. We have had a major growth in 2015, and we have had to catch up our supply capability with the demand that has been growing substantially. And the OEMs, they really want to secure supply. It's awfully it's very awful when you have a phone and it's already done, but you can't find the material to produce the phone. So securing supply is extremely important for our customers. So most of the guidance that you see here come from very strong visibility of our business outlook for 2016. And again, comparing to last year, in 2015, our growth is estimated to be more than 1,000%, and now with the market growing with 100%, we plan to grow more than the market, 130 to 200%, and a substantial part of that come from things we know now, but we don't know exactly how many phones that will be sold in one particular unit. And of course, with the lead time that we discussed, there will be phones launched in the market, especially second half next year, that have not yet been awarded by the OEM. So there are uncertainties there as well. Then you have price erosion, and we are not going to talk about price erosion figures in detail here. We have mentioned before that we have a portfolio of sensors with more and more smaller sensors being shipped to customers. And these smaller sensors, they are lower in manufacturing cost, and we share some of those manufacturing cost reductions with our customers as well. So we reduce the ASP, not because of price erosion, but because of wanting to drive even more volumes and making the penetration go bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's some color to the guidance in revenues.
Just one follow-up. Say that Samsung, for example, has 80% penetration going into next year. Then your goal of having 50 to 70% of the total market would imply having some volumes from Samsung as well. Or am I wrong?
Well, we haven't. It's not easy for us to estimate exactly their penetration of the smartphones. So I'm not going to comment on your figure. And generally, we get the question about Samsung very frequently. Thomas mentioned there are lots of phone vendors out there, and coming from Sweden or Norway, we see a lot of Apple and Samsung phones in the shops here, but the world is bigger outside of Scandinavia too, and there are many brands out there that are not so visible in the shops here. So our customer base is very extensive, and what is good with a broad customer base is we are not dependent on one single customer. A customer can suffer various trouble. They can go to a competitor, or they can simply lose market share as well. And then when you have a few customers, you are vulnerable. We have a very broad customer base, and that is good for our growth as well. And then I always commented about Samsung. We have a growing opportunity with or without Samsung. The market is big and it's growing with or without Samsung. So I'm not going to comment further as to any potential to win business with them. They are part of our addressable market, but the market is big enough with or without them.
Sure. Last one. A question to Pontus. Could you perhaps touch briefly upon the challenges of having the sensor under the cover glass for your specific technology, and perhaps give some color on the progress there?
Yes, as I said in the presentation, when you put something in between the pixel array and the finger, it will affect the measurement. So we have had this as an active development project for some time, and we're about to release the first product. And then there will be more products coming that have different capabilities. But we don't see a showstopper in this area. We expect good performance on these sensors.
Okay, here's another question.
Yeah, this is Oscar Zimperson with Arctic Securities. Could you say something about your development of your algorithm? As I've understood it, that's at the moment you're spending about 15% of your cost of goods sold to external producers. Will that continue, or how would the development in your algorithm be, say, next year?
So I don't recognize that 15% figure. And what we have communicated when it comes to dependency to third-party IP, we license a part of our algorithm from Precise Biometrics today, and we pay a royalty per unit of a very, very low single-digit percentage of our ASP when we sell the sensor. So very, 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 very low single-digit percentage of the ASP. Not to give any further color than that.
Yeah, okay. Just another follow-up. You've talked somewhat about the IP situation, and there's been rumors in the industry about your IP situation. Of course, now you've launched a couple of models in the US. Do you have any other way to prove that your IP or your IP holds for not being sued from, for example, Apple? There's been some rumors out in the market lately that Apple will sue Samsung if they use any fingerprint readers.
Yes, so thank you for asking that question. Actually, we get that question frequently, and some of our competitors make such claims, and they are totally unfounded. And I have answered the same way the last 18 months as I will do now. We have, as Pontus mentioned, we have a very strong IP portfolio, and when OEMs evaluate the fingerprint sensor supplier, they review the IP situation extremely carefully. The fingerprint sensor technology, especially capacitive, has been around for 18 years in that time frame. So a lot of patents date back to 15, 20 years ago. And so we have been selling touch fingerprint sensors for that time frame without any problems at all. And so when OEMs launch phones in the market, they review the IP situation very carefully, as I mentioned. There has been this notion that, well, we are successful in China, so the Chinese OEMs, they are not too careful with the IPR situation, so we will not sell sensors outside of China. And Thomas just mentioned that we have a higher market share outside of China than in China, so maybe that answers that question. Maybe sometime people will not ask us this anymore. I think we have answered it now 18 months, and I think by now we should have sufficient evidence that this is absolutely secure situation from an IP point of view. In fact, we believe, and many OEMs tell us, our IPR situation is the reason for selecting our technology as opposed to competitors. We have a very strong IPR situation.
Okay.
Thank you. Jan Gorski from Handelsbanken. Coming back to market share, so as we've seen, you've been extremely successful in capturing close to 100% of the market outside of that. And Samsung, based on your discussions and your visibility, do you see a change in that in 2016, or will you more or less capture the entire market outside of what happened in Samsung?
Thank you. Well, I mean, given the market share that we are estimating in 2016, which is between 50 to 70%, with that and the growth that we have communicated today, with 130 to 200% growth in revenues, with that assumption comes more competition. So we estimate that more competitors will enter into this market, and there is room for competition. We have substantial growth that we have communicated today, and that is still allowing for competitors to enter into the market. So we are comfortable with that situation, and we believe we have a very strong competitive position going forward, not just in 16 but beyond as well.
Is that based on making conservative assumption, or is that based on what you already know?
Well, I mean, we have seen some phones being launched by competitors, and of course we don't know how scalable our competitors' products are, and how capable they are to grow their business. This is part of the range that we communicate. It's one of the uncertainties, but that's factored into the guidance.
So before the break, Jörgen talked to you around how we see the market potential going forward, and Thomas explained a bit around our customer base and our various relationships there. And then Pontus took you through the journey of how our technology works and why we're leading in that area. So now we thought that we would tie everything together to see how things looks in terms of financials. And now the PC doesn't work not any longer. Can I get somebody here? Hey, we need to unlock the PC. So while you're doing that, what I was about to say is that we will now try to tie everything together in terms of how this goes into our financials, and also look a bit around how we think about growth strategy going forward. So I will kick this off with a few financial slides, and then Jörgen will join me here on stage to talk about growth. So let me start out with 2015, just to recap that. As we talked about earlier, we have been able to present phenomenal revenue growth, growing both year on year as well as sequentially, more than 10x. in 2015, and obviously that has not been able, we hadn't been able to do that without a very steep capacity ramp, and so thanks to our supply team. Besides that, we've been able to post pretty material gross margin improvements. We started out the year at around 27% gross margin, and we came in Q3 at 45%, which is up sequentially 9 points compared to Q2. And obviously this is due to how we sell a different mix of sensors. And sometimes I show this little sample set in terms of how we have moved from larger set of sensors to the newer, smaller ones. So obviously this is critical in terms of what kind of, the mix is critical, in terms of how, what kind of gross margin we can present. But together with that and large volumes and new competitive sensors in the market, we have been able to present this improvement. So obviously the two big drivers behind the increased profitability is the top line growth, the gross margin improvements, and we've been able also to invest heavily in terms of growing the organization, as you know. I've talked about that during the last 2 quarters as well. So all in all, solid profitability gains in Q2 and Q3. So let's move into 16. I'll try to give you some additional color to what's in the P&L and how we reached the guidance. You see the guidance at the bottom for the P&L, i.e. we estimate that we will be able to improve our operating margins in 16 compared to second half of 15. So starting out with the gross margin, of course, we expect to continue to be able to present healthy gross margins in 16, as I just talked about for 15, and with the current business model in place. We believe it will be a bit more lumpy by quarter, depending on the product mix, the competitive environment that we talked about earlier that will increase, and also how we manage our decisions along driving penetration and securing gross margins. Long term, I've said before, and longer term, even beyond 2016, we see sustainable gross margins being around 40 to 45%. So that hasn't changed. Another topic is really expanding the organization. We have talked about sequential growth of the organization in 15 by quarter, and that will continue in 16 as well. Right now we have plans of expanding the organization by around 50% compared to our exit position of 15. That of course means substantial increases in average headcounts, which will drive the people cost in our P&L. So, and areas where we see a lot of the investments going are obviously new technologies in R&D, around coverage out in the geographies with Thomas's team and also Niklas' team when it comes to field engineers. We will talk a bit more around new business opportunities and how we invest there, but also in support functions and building the back end of the company and processes. A couple of areas that will be different in the P&L in 16 compared to 15, I've noted on the slide. We're investing a lot in R&D, and due to that we have more platform-oriented projects. The capitalization of gross R&D expenses will increase somewhat. So you should see that difference or that change in 16. I also said at the Q3 earnings call that our tax loss carry forwards were more or less consumed by the end of September. So going into Q4 and 16, we will be in a tax position and we will pay taxes. A good proxy to think about here is obviously that the Swedish corporate tax rate of 22%, although that we will increase the entities around the world, and that might change over time. All right, so let me move into the balance sheet and talk around a couple of dependencies there. Let me start out with FX exposure. All our revenues are US dollar based. as well as our material and logistics related costs. And you know that we are reporting financials in Swedish krona, we guide in Swedish krona, so obviously with a financial policy of not hedging our foreign exchange currencies, it means that we are very dependent on how the US dollar develop. And so obviously we will monitor this during the year. We have assumed, as you can see, 8.5 on average for 2016 as the dollar rate to the Swedish krona. On the right-hand side, I've added a chart so you get a sense of how our operating expenses look in different currencies. As you can see, we're mainly operating in Scandinavian currencies with some flavors in euros, dollars, and also Asian currencies. This is a Q3 snapshot, and that will evolve as we grow our international teams, obviously. While we don't guide around the cash flow, I do want to mention a couple of things around working capital. We have an effective model in place, which is allowing us to grow top line materially without huge investments in net working capital. In 16, we're now reaching, we've been ramping up supply capacity, and now we will have a better balance between our supply and the market demand. And that might mean that in certain quarters, it will be a bit more lumpy. We might want to take some investments in working capital, for example, in increased inventories. So you should expect that to happen in 16 as well. In the lower right-hand corner, you see a cash flow and a net cash graph from our Q3 earnings report. And that really shows that we have been cash flow positive only in 15 and profitable since Q2. Obviously, I get a lot of questions around this net cash position from you investors. We want to be a financially solid company that our customers, our partners in the ecosystem, our shareholders can trust for the long term, that we can be around and invest for future growth. But of course, we will use some of that cash, specifically, in terms of organic investments in new technologies. We talked about in Pontus's section around new things coming out in terms of R&D in 16 and 17. We also want to cover new markets and new opportunities. M&A opportunities will be reviewed if they fit our overall growth strategy. And then cash distribution is a question that I more and more get. What are we going to do? Are we going to have dividends, etc.? So I do want to state that currently there is no dividend policy in the company, nor do we have an empowerment from the annual general meeting to buy back our own shares. And any changes to these policies will be reviewed and determined by the board of Fingerprint Cards and then consequently decided by an AGM. All right, so let me wrap up by sharing a few focus areas that I have for next year. Obviously, with guiding a growth of 130 to 200% growth, I and the rest of the management team will be really focused on executing on these growth plans in terms of how we balance ASP and margins, etc. We have a great operating model in place, and we need to secure the leverage in that also in 16. That goes for supply capacity, it goes for the ecosystem of partners that we have in place and need to have in place, and also the financial strength that we want to have in order to make the right decisions going forward. I've talked quite a bit around our investments and that we will ramp up the organizations, leading to a continued technology leadership, the new business opportunities that we wanted to review and execute on, and also how we build the back end of the company. I will also support the board of the company in establishing long-term financial targets. I'm sure that you in the investor community, that will be beneficial for you to understand how we will look at market share, revenue growth, profitability, and cash allocation topics going forward. but that's something we'll be back in 16 with. So with that, I turn it over to you again, Jörgen.
Thank you, Johan. So we have talked a lot about 2015, our position in the market and how we expect to grow the business in 2016 from the current smartphone proposition we have been focusing on recently. Now I would like to talk about growth opportunities for the future beyond serving the business we are in now. And this is a way of describing the strategy for our growth going forward. So here you can see 2 dimensions at which we can grow our business. On the x-axis you see the segments that we serve, smartphones and other market segments. And on the y-axis. And on the x-axis we see the products or offerings that we bring to the market. So let's start with the bottom left one here, which we want to maximize. And that's really our current business in providing fingerprint sensors to the smartphone segment. And clearly we have brought forward a very strong position in the market. We estimate that in 2016 our share of the value captured in this market is between 50 and 70%. And there is healthy growth in the future after 16 as well. You saw some 500 million units in 2016 in the market that we address, not including Apple, growing to almost 1 billion units in our estimate in 2017. So substantial growth in this segment. And for us, having a very broad customer base with many OEMs in China, but increasingly outside of China with those OEMs that start to embed fingerprint sensors, there is a healthy growth opportunity while we continue to serve our existing customer base. So priority 1, growing with our customers, continuing to earn their trust in putting our technology into the phones that they sell millions of units every day. But of course, there is room to add more customers as well in this business. There are more customers to win. And that's going to be a major challenge or opportunity for us, an objective, more than a challenge for 2016 and onwards. So that is how we grow the business in the existing segment, smartphone vendors, with our existing products, fingerprint sensors. Then we can add new segments to the fingerprint sensor. And that is what we show here. So what we discuss now is bringing fingerprint sensor technology to other market segments that can use a fingerprint sensor. You remember a couple of slides back, I mentioned that this started to become a material growth opportunity in 2017 and 18, some in 16 as well, but mainly in 17 and 18. And in 18, we see that this opportunity in volume is almost the same as the smartphone opportunity in 16. So here we talk about PCs and tablets and those type of devices. You heard Thomas saying that we have launched one tablet device already, and the PC ecosystem is another major opportunity ahead. But I think the biggest one in the years to come now is the smart cards. And here what we need to do is to adapt our touch fingerprint sensor technology to fit into the particular requirements of smart cards. So in smart cards you need to make the sensor thin so they fit into the thinness of a card. I actually have one here which is a bit far away from you, sitting in the back, but it is a touch fingerprint sensor mounted in a credit card with real electronics on it. So that is something that we have been working with our partners for trials in 2016 or 15 and going into commercial launches in 2016. Another major competitive advantage we have entering into this space is the power consumption that Pontus mentioned. The pixel design of our sensors consume very little power. In comparison with our competitors, we have seen competitors quoting 20 to 30 times higher power consumption than our sensors. That's okay in a phone with a large battery, but in a credit card that does not contain any battery at all, that starts to play an important impact in being able to serve that market at all. Then we have the scale aspect. We have shown the industry that we are capable of reducing cost of fingerprint sensors dramatically. We have mentioned previously our first generation of touch fingerprint sensors being 70% bigger than our newest ones. And so we have been able to reduce the manufacturing cost of our touch fingerprint sensors for smartphones dramatically. We know how to make that development, and we are now accelerating the work to go through a similar development effort to be able to bring to market very low cost touch fingerprint sensors for smart cards and the other segments that we talk about here. And we know how to do that. We have done it in 2015. Now we are going to do it for the new segments as well. And to talk about scale, just to put things in perspective, Thomas mentioned earlier us shipping 1 million units for our sensors on a particular working day. Some of our competitors are still struggling to ship the first 1,000 units annually. So there is a difference there. And so that scale advantage that we have established for our current business is absolutely something that we will bring forward to the smart card business. And so generally, a lot of growth. I will come back to the smart cards. Then, when we have brought forward this type of fully embedded solutions for this type of smart card deployments, we can bring that proposition to other segments as well that need embedded solutions. Automotive is one category, we have industrial and medical, we have Internet of Things. I believe personally that all these billions of devices that are going to be connected to the internet, according to many people in the industry, many of them will lack an input-output device. Being able to touch that device and then you're able to verify yourself, log on to that type of device, I think will be a very competitive proposition. Think about your home alarm system as one category, but plenty of others. So big growth opportunities, hundreds of millions of units just 2 years from now in our estimate. On top of that, the next opportunity we have for growth is to invest and innovate in bringing new offerings to the customers we already have and serve, the smartphone vendors. And here, this is really about making our proposition to the phone OEMs even more relevant. And to give some example here, I have this trackpad example. Here is a particularly great phone from one of our customers. I suggest you to buy one, and it has the fingerprint sensor on the back. When I touch the sensor, it opens up the phone, it unlocks my device. Then I can start to use it as a trackpad. You see I'm scrolling the sensor on the back, and I can flip through different menus. I can look at my photo gallery, and I can flip through the different pictures by sliding on the trackpad. This is one of the capabilities. You can see it's launched in phones. It is one of those features that is highlighted by the OEMs. And that's one example of us adding value to our fingerprint sensor beyond fingerprint recognition. On top of that, we have more of this type of features underway. I'm not going to talk about this in detail. I'm sure our competitors are listening to this presentation. I'm not going to give them any good suggestions. But think about how to improve security overall. We talked about mobile payments previously. I have a small anecdote. I talked to an analyst last week from Hong Kong. He had a recent business visit to China, and so he met a couple of clients. They had dinner. They paid the bill in the restaurant with the fingerprint sensor in the phone. They split the bill between them with the fingerprint sensor in the phone. They went into the taxi. They paid the taxi with the fingerprint sensor and split that bill. It's being used here and now, and we can help our customers and other players in the ecosystem to improve security even further. Pontus mentioned through the algorithm development, but there are other means as well. So that's a tangible opportunity. In general, bring more features to our customers that have value for them, making our proposition even more valuable for our customers. That will preserve our place in the value chain, and it will increase the value. And then we can bring more offerings to our customers, not just fingerprint sensors and things similar to that proposition. We can bring totally different semiconductor devices and sell that to the customers that we serve. This can be developed through organic development, or we can address acquisition opportunities that might arise as we develop this further. Keep in mind, this is real estate in the phone. It's something that we have on a very significant basis going forward, and that is something that we are going to leverage in our growth. Beyond that, we are also going to evaluate and explore other opportunities once we have brought in these new segments, expanded into new offerings. We can bring new services and capabilities to existing and new segments as well. So lots of growth opportunities here. The growth that you have seen in 2015, long term, we have just started to scratch on the surface on what can be established with our technology and with the team we have. Then going to smart cards again, just to shed more light to this, because this is such an interesting opportunity. And just to mention on the business aspects of this, we have been conducting trials in markets, especially in Europe, this year, and those trials have gone well. So we are now entering into the phase where our partners start to plan for the commercial launch of these smart cards. So Swipe and MasterCard is one of those partnerships that we have already announced, but we have others underway as well. Our job is to finalize the work to be able to put our fingerprint sensors into these devices. That's well underway, but we need to team up with the other companies in the value chain as well in order to make up for a complete offering and deploy these to the consumers. So again, this is something that we think will cater for a lot of growth opportunities going forward. To wrap things up and finalize the latter part of the presentation before the second Q&A session, let me summarize today's event and how we look upon the future ahead. So starting where I started today, according to analysts, we are the #1 fingerprint sensor vendor globally. So we are a global leader in our space. We have brought forward that proposition because of our leading technology. Pontus Jägemalm talked about this. It's something that has not happened overnight. 18 years of a lot of R&D work in the lab, not so fancy perhaps, but the real tangible technology leadership is coming out of that development. And great products used by our customers to differentiate their phones and create great reviews for the phones. a leading patent portfolio that make our customers trust us in empowering their phones with our technology. Market-leading customers, Thomas talked about this, and we are serving the growing OEMs in the world. We are proud to be so successful in China with all these unknown Chinese brands for those of us in Scandinavia that don't travel so much to China. We are working with the leading partners in the ecosystem. When Google and Microsoft and those type of well-known companies want to bring their proposition together with biometry, they go to us, as shown by the 2 Nexus phones that were launched in the second half, as shown by Microsoft launching their first device with the Microsoft brand using biometry with our technology. And then finally, if I dare say, we have the best people in the whole industry in our organization. We have an absolutely leading R&D team that brings the best technology out there that you can ever imagine. 30% PhDs. As far as I'm concerned, each one of them should get the Nobel Prize. We have a fantastic sales team led by Thomas, who has worked in this industry for a long time, knows all the decision makers in the phone industry, and served by great people across our different territories. We are now building forward a backbone with Johan, who joined us recently, Henrik Sendell, who is with us today, Jan Johannesson is with us today. We have many people in our management team that is with us here and take part of their respective unit. So we have the best team, and we are going to capitalize on that going forward. So as Johan mentioned, with the profitable growth that we see in 2016, we can accelerate a lot of the development that will continue to put us in the leading position going forward. And that is thanks to a highly scalable business model that we have put forward now in 2016. So with that, I would like to close the presentation and open up for the final Q&A session. And I will be joined by the rest of my management team here and today's speaker in that Q&A session. Thank you.
Could I just start off focusing on the smart card markets? I guess the whole industry is kind of like not necessarily specific on where it's going, but it's of course a huge market out there. But how do you see the value propositions for banks and other credit cards and payment cards producers to increase the cost of a credit card by 100%? Like a credit card cost today is about $2.50, and the cost of including a fingerprint card reader would then double the price. How do you see the value proposition for credit card producers to include the card?
Yeah, thank you. So let me repeat the question. Basically, how do we make up the economics for adding a fingerprint sensor into these smart cards? Well, generally speaking, you have to look at this from the credit card companies or the card companies. They are being increasingly met by competition from these players. So there is a competitive aspect to this to begin. People are using the phone for payments. We have talked about it a lot. These days, the phone is becoming used for payments, and we come to the point now where you don't need to bring your wallet with you anymore. You can just bring your phone, and you can use your phone as a payment device. And that means that a lot of new people are trying to enter into the payment scheme. You have big companies like Apple with Apple Pay. We have Google Pay that is a close partner with us with the Android Pay or Android Pay payment system that comes with Android 6.0. We have Alibaba in China who have the Alipay mobile payment service that is hugely successful. And so the credit card companies, the MasterCards and Visas and American Express of the world, they want to retain their real estate, as I call it as well, not just being something that is invisible for the consumer in the back end. They want to have their brand name associated with the payments as well. So that's the competitive aspect. On top of that, if you just look at the payments that are conducted with a payment card, if you use your payment card for the purchases, well then you have, you are not going to make up the economics by people paying much more for their cards necessarily. So it comes from reducing fraud. With just, and I learned interestingly, just by being able to detect a living person that is subject to the payment when you have a card present at the payment, that itself reduces fraud, even if it is done by the wrong person. So you don't even need to have a successful verification with your fingerprint. Just a verification reduces fraud. So there are companies that are better equipped than us to make up the economics for why it makes sense to them, but it seems it does, because we have a huge interest from these companies these days, and a much bigger interest than we had a couple of months ago. And again, our job is to make the technology affordable. When we look at the smartphones in 2014, we didn't ship millions of units or a million units per working day. And as Thomas said, it was that type of volume for the full year. And that was because sensors were expensive. So OEMs couldn't afford to put them in mass volume deployments. And our job is to make the technology affordable. So the OEMs can add the fingerprint sensor to the bill of material without materially affecting their business proposition. And we can do that. And we know how to make the economics work for us to make them affordable. And that's what we are going to invest in now. And you will hear more about this as we develop this further.
But one comment on that. I mean, there could be different players paying. If you take ICA, for instance, or Carrefour, or these kind of players, if you can reduce the queue time in the store, you increase your revenue a lot. And by using NFC, you can reduce that. Very convenient. On the other hand, you don't know who is using that card, so you normally set a limit to $20 or 20 euros. So by combining NFC and fingerprint sensor, you get both the convenience and the security. So that's another.
And the speed. Think
Yes.
about the lines at IKEA when you pay your furniture.
Yeah, you leave. I mean, rather than going to a coffee shop, you leave. But if it's fast through, but then you will go there. So.
Any other questions?
I have a couple of questions on smart cards as well. I wonder, how do you tackle the problem with the silicon being not flexible in smart cards? And perhaps the second question is, do you plan to offer a specific sensor for smart cards, or do you plan on leaving that up to the likes of Swipe, for example?
Could you repeat the question? Could you please repeat the question?
The first question related to bendability of the sensor. And the second question is whether we're developing a specific sensor for the smart card application. Maybe I would start with the second, because the answer is very simple. It's yes. Then for the first requirement about bendability, yes, there are bendability requirements for cards. And then we need to translate that. What does that mean for the sensor? And there are various ways to solve that. since we haven't released that product yet, I'm not going to tell you what those ways are. But it's an active development area for us right now, and we haven't seen any showstoppers in that area.
Do you expect to follow suit of Swipe, or do you aim to improve the sensor compared to what they do? Because they grind it down, right?
Right. Since it's in active development right now, we don't talk exactly about what we do on the sensor. More than that, it's in development right now.
And just to add further to that, I mean, what you need to be able to manage is bendability for the whole card. So it's something that we need to work with other players as well. And so it's not just development that we do by ourselves. It's a typical effort that we do in partnership with others. You mentioned one of those partners, but we have other partnerships in this development as well.
Any further questions?
Also a question on smart cards. In terms of how to register your print, what do you see as the solution to that, aside from thousands of people having to go to the bank and sort of register your print?
Well, there's nothing inherently that would prevent you from registering the way that you do on a smartphone device like this one. In fact, in this example, the sensor is almost identical. So you could enroll on the card.
You would have the same, or the process.
But of course, this depends on the whole infrastructure in that industry, how that will be handled in the end.
And in terms of also for smart cards, in terms of for mass adoption, how sort of what price level do you believe that the sensor need to be for that to be deployed on a large scale? Do we need to come down to $1 or?
Well, I mean, you have seen the smartphone penetration grow rapidly, and we have talked about the ASP levels of $3 to $3.5 in 2015, and reductions in 16 beyond that. So clearly, we have to, as mentioned before, we need to see significant cost reductions in manufacturing the cost for fingerprint sensors for this particular segment. As mentioned before, here we can reuse a lot of the work that we do for the smartphones, where we are ahead of that development. And then what we need to do here is to make the special adaptations for this market that we don't need to do for the smartphones. I'm not going to dwell further on that, but as mentioned before, we know what we need to do in this space, and we have aggressive targets as to what type of manufacturing cost we would like to achieve. We are not going to disclose that at this time, because we don't want our competitors to take note of that, but we think it can be done, and it's something we are working on.
Then a question on the operating margin guidance. You said that it will be above the second half of the year, rather than comparing to what we know, the third quarter of about 36%. Is that because gross margins were sort of exceptionally high in the quarter, that you think that's not a sort of good reference point, Q3 rather than the second half of the year?
Q3 is in the sort of long-term interval that I talked about, right? Even longer than 16, so it's not a bad reference point, but we decided to guide on the full, instead of just one quarter, to refer it to a full half instead, since we have been ramping up so quickly. So we'll know, all of us, at the end of January what H2 is in terms of operating margin.
Last month or something, there was a rumor or perhaps a bid for one of your competitors, Genetics. And it was obviously, or at least rumors that there were Chinese interest behind that. Have you heard anything regarding that, or do you know what's going on there?
Yes, so question was rumors about the acquisition of one of our competitors, Synaptics, in China. And yes, there were such rumors. And we have a big presence in China, as many of you have noted. And so we have checked with our sources in China, and we haven't found any substance in those rumors. Then, having said that, there is a lot of interest from China in strengthening the semiconductor industry overall. So there are lots of rumors floating around about M&A activities from China in general. But this one we have not been able to substantiate. It should be said that Synaptics in the fingerprint sensor side, they have not been highly successful in winning any business in China. In fact, the Chinese competitors are more successful in China. So Synaptics, their main business is actually with Samsung and with Apple for other products than fingerprint sensors. So for me, it's a bit illogical for some Chinese entity to acquire Synaptics. But who knows? But we haven't found any substance.
Could you comment specifically on what you view as the swing factor between 50% to 70% of the market? Because clearly it doesn't seem to be penetration. Or is it?
Well, penetration is, I mean, we have communicated, sorry, the question was the range between 50% to 70% market share and our guidance range. Well, penetration is one of them. I mean, we have a major customer base already. Even if we know that they are going to embed fingerprint sensors in phones, as mentioned before, we don't necessarily know how many phones they will sell. So between the different OEMs, there is a swing factor in their respective market share. And that is one of the reasons for uncertainty. Obviously, as we go into the latter part of the year, we have less visibility on the phones to be launched than in the first part of the year because of the lead times that is typically 6 months or so. And then one of the unknown factors for us is how will our competitors be able to grow their business if they are able to bring a proposition forward that works well. And if they have a proposition that starts to be good enough for commercial launch, is that going to scale the way we have been able to scale in 2015 or not? We don't know. So there are some unknowns that we have to factor into our revenue guidance, and that's why we wanted to give an interval.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, one question regarding the revenue guidance for 2016, and to what extent does it take the smart card potential into account?
Yes, so how much of our revenue guidance comes from the smart cards? Well, you saw on the slides the part of the market that comes from the other segments than smartphones. And I didn't break it down in absolute detail. Maybe somebody will take a ruler and measure in millimeter how high it is relative to the red bar below. And it's not so big, and it's the market which is for us or others to take part in. And some of that market is also available now. There are, for instance, PCs with fingerprint sensors out there already, mainly swipe technology today. Our share in that space is not so big, or it's actually zero for the swipe fingerprint sensors in PCs. So there are commercial volumes in 16 built into our revenue guidance for the other segments, but it's not very substantial, and in particular relative to the 6.5 to 8.5 billion SEK. It's still relatively small, but in 17 and 18 it has the potential of being relatively big.
Any further questions? Yes, please.
Well, you're growing at a rapid pace right now and expected to deliver on huge volumes next year. How is your readiness supply chain-wise to deliver on this? Could you elaborate a bit on operational risks therein, etc.?
Yes, so question was how can we grow our supply capacity in 2016 given the big growth ahead? And this has been one of our major challenges in 2015, and we have had to increase our supply capacity much more than expected, and hence we have had to guide for increased revenues in 15 on a number of occasions, simply because the demand has been much higher than we anticipated, and it takes time to increase capacity as a fabless semiconductor vendor when we have to work with the foundries to effectively take capacity of somebody else. We have had a lot of efforts in 15 to grow our capacity in the supply, and Johan mentioned that before, thanks to a heroic effort by our supply team. And now we are at the phase where we are about to meet the entire demand. Not fully there, but in 16, from the visibility we have now, we will be able to meet the entire demand. And there are still some risks in that development, and of course we have dependencies to third parties here, and factories can there can be earthquakes, or there can be events totally beyond our control, but I would say that it's manageable risk the way we see it now, and compared to 15, we think that we can be in a situation where we can meet the entire demand by our supply capacity. I would like to thank you for joining us today in this event, and eventful day even, and thank you for all the questions that you have brought forward. Good questions during the day, and of course I would like to thank my colleagues in the leadership team for their presentations as well. So thank you for today, and I hope to see you next time.